Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Sport Limerick Soccer Podcast, where we're joined by a guest from the opposition, shall we say, this week in Cian O'Connell, who some may recognise when he starts talking from his commentary duty with LOI TV at Galway United games, home games at DC Park. Thanks very much for joining us this evening, Cian.
Delighted to talk, Adrian.
Obviously, the reason you're joining us is there's a big game to preview. This coming Friday at the Markets Field. You have Treaty United hosting Galway United. Considering the form that both sides are coming into this game in, Cian, it promises to be a lively affair with both teams full of confidence.
Yeah, it should be a really interesting game, Adrian, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's brilliant from an outside perspective to see senior football back in Limerick, and the team has done so well under Tommy Barrett this year, and they deserve so much credit. From a Galway United point of view, the fact that 2 wins have been stitched back to back since the restart of the league is hugely encouraging too, because as John Caulfield, in his own words, he alluded to the fact that Galway United were slightly inconsistent in the first third of the season, but there's definitely been an upturn in form, and there's a bit of momentum being generated, which is important. But you have to acknowledge Treaty United and a really good win away to Cove Ramblers last Saturday evening. And the fact that you have a couple of Limerick guys playing with Galway United, you have a couple of Galway guys playing with Limerick, and a lot of ex-players from both clubs, if you want to call Treaty, with the fact that a lot of ex-Limerick FC players or whatever. So it's really, really sprinkled with subplots, and it should be a really good game at the Markets Field.
Yeah, certainly will be the case, you'd imagine. You mentioned it there about Galway's inconsistency, Cian. Obviously, you've got Shelburne at the moment who appear to be kind of running out in front with the First Division title. I obviously had Galway right up, judging by the start of the season on paper, with the management, the players, and the full-time setup right up there. Would you say, would it be fair to say that obviously it's been frustrating at times for Galway in the opening stages of the season, and obviously, as you said, you alluded to yourself, maybe very inconsistent results or performances?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it has been frustrating, Adrian. Galway United had such high expectations last season. At the end of the campaign, they won 8 out of 12 under John Caulfield, and he really just injected a bit of positivity into the Galway United, into the club, and there was a real belief and a feeling that Galway United could make a real bid for promotion this year. And it didn't go to plan. The pre-season went really well for Galway United. They played in some excellent games against top flight opposition, and everything suggested that it was going well ahead of the season. But then when the matches started, first game against Shelburne, it was a really tight affair, 0-0 draw. The following week at Lone Town were smashing on the night, and they defeated Galway United 3-1. That was a bit of a setback. And the week after that, you had the Cabinteely game that didn't take place. So all of a sudden, within 2 or 3 weeks, Galway United only had 1 point until they got the award of the 3 points for that Cabinteely game subsequently. So there was a bit of pressure built then early on, and it was hard, and they just didn't get that, I suppose, that level of consistency in their performances. Right before the break, it was a demoralising loss away to Shelburne, 4-0 at Tolka Park, and that really hurt Galway United, and that was a massive blow. But then perhaps the break was used well, and United came back. The game against Athlone Town, and Athlone were really good in the first half at DC Park a couple of weeks ago. They led by 1-0, and United were lucky to only be the interval. There was a massive improvement in Galway United's performance levels, driven by Conor McCormack in the centre of the park, who was brilliant in the second half of that match. And ultimately, John Caulfield's team prevailed. They got a 2-1 win there, and they brought that second half form into last week's game against Cabinteely, and it was a really good first half display from Galway United. And to get back-to-back wins was something John Caulfield wanted to do, because they hadn't done that so far this year. So they'll hit the Markets Field confident after those performances. However, they'll be fully aware of the threat that Treaty United carry, and the fact that Treaty have generated their own momentum. And there's, just looking from the outside, seems to be a real belief coursing through that Treaty team that they can launch a bid for promotion, and John Caulfield is completely aware of that, and it's just set up nicely. The only pity, Adrian, is that there won't be crowds at the game, because I'm sure with the results that Treaty have put together, I know you have 100, but I'm sure you'll be talking maybe 1,500, 2,000 if times were right, because Galway United would bring a couple hundred down the road if they were able to. So that's the only pity. However, it is nice that 100 spectators can go. And last week at Eamon DC Park, the 100 spectators against Cabinteely, that made a difference, and it definitely increased the intensity levels.
Yeah, certainly. And you mentioned obviously that, Treaty have been in good form as well. They've they've only had 2 defeats all season, Cian, and obviously in the first section of the league, we'll say the first round of games, they had reputable draws, obviously away in Galway, away in Shelburne. Then obviously they've turned those draws into victories. I think it would be fair to say now that maybe teams have started to take notice now that Treaty aren't just maybe a one-round team, that they really are there maybe for the long haul, and it will be a difficult assignment. I suppose, like yourself, like myself, I suppose everyone has been surprised as well by the fact that they've done so well, considering the team was really only formed and gelling together about 3 to 4 weeks before the season started.
Yeah, definitely. But there's really good players in that squad. I remember when Galway United were out of action and when they weren't in the League of Ireland, I was a regular at games in Thomond Park when Limerick played there, and then when they moved to the Markets Field. And at that time, you had the likes of Red Hanlon. I can remember him being involved in squads. And then you have other players, really strong players that I would see from like junior clubs. Sean Gearns, he was on trial with Galway United before. He's been very, very effective for Limerick. And then Mark Ludden, vastly experienced player in the League of Ireland, a really good servant to Galway United and Merview United before that. So like there's lots of Joel Coustrain. You've loads of players. Jack Lynch, of course, was with Galway for a season and a half and did ever so well. Captain of Treaty now. Joe Collins came into the Treaty team last week against Cove, acquitted himself well. He's a really able midfielder and was perhaps a bit unfortunate to not get more Galway United, but he has plenty to offer in the League of Ireland. So you have loads of talented players in that Treaty squad. Clyde O'Donnell, so many good, effective players. And as you mentioned, Treaty have been really hard to beat throughout the season. And that's something I spoke to John Caulfield for my day job, interviewing him this week. And that's what he stated, the fact that they have so many able players, so many like really good players for this level. And while Tommy Barrett only had a very short time to stitch a squad together, he did ever so well to assemble the squad that he did put together. And to me, it's no surprise how well Treaty are doing. The only thing is they will want to show that they can maintain that, but there's nothing to suggest that they won't be able to maintain it, considering the manner in which they're so hard working, so hard to beat. And as you said, they've only lost a couple of games this season, which illustrates that perfectly.
Yeah, and obviously 2 key players for that, Cian, for that surge from Treaty United this year, 2 players who you know quite well. Obviously, Mark Ludden, you mentioned already. He actually captained the side for the first time last week in the absence of another former Galway player, Jack Lynch, who is the full-time captain of Treaty United. Both sides, Jack Lynch is quite versatile. He's played at right back, but he's also played at centre-back on one occasion and also midfield on a good few occasions. And Mark Ludden, they have been leading by example, to be fair to them. They've been very vocal in terms of their leadership as well on the field. It's been superb, but also performance-wise. I know Mark Ludden actually played very well against yourselves in the game as well, like at Eamon DC Park. That probably would come as no surprise to you, though, considering what you know of those players already. Yeah,
completely. Mark Ludden is a really able player, and he had some really good seasons, particularly when Galway United were in the Premier Division. He really emerged as a key player for Galway United. And it was disappointing for many that he isn't with Galway United this season just due to work commitments, etc. But he has so much to offer in the League of Ireland still. And as you alluded to there, Adrian, he played a really good game at Eamon DC Park in that draw earlier in the season. Jack Lynch too. Like I can remember his father Tommy being in charge of Limerick, and there was many good battles against Galway United when Donald Reardon was in charge of Galway United at that time. So that's a family synonymous with football in Limerick. But Jack Lynch, when he came to Galway United, he made a massive difference. He came midway through season a couple of years ago. Him, Stephen Christopher and Killian Bruder from Newcastle West all joined Galway United, and it was a really young Galway United team at the time. But those 3 players added so much. They went on a bit of a cup run, and the following season which was last season, there was a belief that United could launch a promotion bid, mainly because those three players had delivered so much in the previous campaign. So Jack Lynch can play in a number of positions. He predominantly played at right full for Galway United, but he's well able to play in the centre of the park, as he's shown can also do a job at centre half. Joe Collins as well, another ex-Galway United player. Tadhg Ryan, of course, had a successful spell with Galway United, where he was very prominent as a goalkeeper, and he's highly thought of in Galway. But so you've a lot of links then for Galway United. Shane Duggan, of course, Killian Brewder. So there's no shortage of guys who have experience playing for Galway United and for Treaty or Limerick previously.
Yeah, that brings me nicely on to the next subplot, as you called it earlier on. Obviously, you mentioned Killian Brewder and Shane Duggan there. I noticed from your commentary, I did watch a good bit of the game against Cavan last week, that you were very complimentary of both Brewder and Maurice Nugent for the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we knew that Killian had a lot of potential in Limerick. Unfortunately, we know the circumstances why he had to even leave the club. He didn't actually want to leave Limerick FC at the time, but as it turned out, it's worked out quite well for him in the end. Has it been going well for Killian? And also, on another note, you did inform me that Shane Duggan had been carrying a knock, which I wasn't aware of, and I know he was on the substitutes bench, which I was obviously slightly surprised about last week. How has it been going for those two players, Cian?
Yeah, Killian Brewder, he was out for a short spell earlier in the season, but he's come back in, and he's really cemented a good partnership there with Maurice Nugent, particularly in the last couple of games. Galway played with three at the back for a good part of the first third of matches, but in recent weeks they've had four at the back, and they've been very, very solid. And Conor McCormack in front of the back four has been brilliant as captain and an anchor in the midfield, really. But Killian Brewder and Maurice Nugent, at the end of last season, during that kind of storming finish to the season when Galway United earned their place in the playoffs and got to the playoffs and were beaten by Longford in the first division final. But in that run of 8 wins in 12 games, Nugent and Brewder did form a very solid partnership for the majority of those matches. They had Kevin Farragher was with Galway United for a spell last season, but he emigrated to the UK for a spell. So he was a loss at that time, but it enabled Nugent and Brewder to forge a good central defensive partnership that's been reunited, if you want to call it that, in recent weeks. So Killian Brewder has loads to offer, and it's funny because for the last number of years, Mark Ludden's long throw-ins were a feature at Galway United's play, but now Brewder is the man that's arrowing them into the area. So on Friday, I'm sure you'll have Mark Ludden on one side and Killian Brewder on the other. So there's going to be no shortage of long throws being hurled into the area. Shane Duggan, like what a player Shane Duggan can be. He had a bit of a knock in the last couple of weeks. He wasn't in the side last week, but Shane Duggan is like what a left foot. He scored a couple of crackers for Galway United last season against Shamrock Rovers B and UCD on the last night of the regulation season. Really two of the best goals seen at Eamon DC Park for quite some time. So that showed what he can do, and like he's a really able player, a really good midfield player. Galway United are stocked with a good lot of options in the centre of the park. David Hurley, who was with Cove for a number of years, he came back into the starting 11 last week, and he had a good game alongside McCormack. And Gary Boylan is another versatile player. He's played a lot at right back this season, but he's played in the centre of the park for the last couple of games. He's a Mayo man, but he's done quite well in a central midfield role. So John Caulfield has a lot of options there, but Shane Duggan has a lot to offer Galway United going forward.
Yeah, obviously we do a weekly podcast here where former Limerick manager Noel O'Connor joins me and former Limerick player Jason O'Connor, and we were discussing obviously Shane Duggan. And one thing we picked up on, I suppose, was the real challenge for Duggan was obviously the introduction of Conor McCormack, the signing of Conor McCormack to the team, because obviously both those players would be similar to each other. Duggan has been. I know when he was younger, he was more of a box-to-box midfielder until Martin Russell came into Limerick FC. He kind of was more of a defensive midfielder then at that stage under him, and it hadn't changed much. Do you think there is room, Cian? You say that John Caulfield has players stocked in midfield, quality players. Do you think there is room realistically for Conor McCormack and Shane Duggan in the one team in Galway?
Yeah, no, I do, definitely, because like McCormack, when he came in, he's well able to anchor the midfield. And last year, Shane Duggan's role was he probably had more of a defensive role, but this year in the early games he was maybe given a bit more license to play further forward, considering Conor McCormack was there beside him, or basically in front of the back four, which enabled Shane Duggan to go and play, because Shane Duggan can go and play. Like, he's a really good passing range. It probably is fair of the lads to say that, and what a servant Noel O'Connor was to the game. I can remember him many years ago when he was over Limerick. He'd always be at Terryland Park, as it was then, watching games in the first division. Like, he was ahead of his time in the sense that he was always at matches and seeing other teams in action, and he prepared really good Limerick teams that I remember well too. So but yeah, no, that is probably a fair assessment from the lads in one way. But if you're watching Galway United play this season, Shane Duggan definitely has been given more license to play further up the pitch, and he can do damage there because his passing range is good, and he's really good ability. And as we mentioned previously, he scored a couple of goals last season that were valuable goals. That goal against UCD ultimately was the goal that earned Galway United a place in the playoffs by virtue of getting that draw against UCD on the last night of the regulation season.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned earlier on about the fact that Killian Bruder has long throw range ability, and obviously the same with Mark Ludden. Treaty United are very strong on set pieces, Cian. Really strong in terms of both throw-ins and corner kicks and free kicks, even as you saw last week. I know Darren Murphy scored an own goal off one of Charlie Fleming's deliveries, but that has been huge for Treaty because we don't seem to be looked massively dangerous from open play because of maybe the defensive nature of the team. So like, I suppose John Caulfield, that'll be one thing John Caulfield will be drilling into Galway as well, is that, you know, you've got to be strong in that area of the field to make, or else, and I know he'll be fairly angry if Treaty do manage probably to score from set pieces this weekend.
Yeah, definitely. You have a lot of physically imposing players, I think, in the Treaty squad, strong players, and then like Mark Ludden's throw-ins and the deliveries from set pieces. The Treaty will commit bodies forward, and they will attack those deliveries that are going to be either thrown in or that are going to be clipped into the area. So definitely, like, Treaty have a lot of physically strong players and forceful players, and that is an area Galway United will need to be aware of, and they'll need to be diligent in a defensive fashion because Treaty will pose problems that way. But like the game earlier on in the season, Sean McSweeney was really, really effective for Treaty that evening. Like, and he showed his range of skill and his talent, and he has the ability to unlock defenses too. So I think you'll be glad to know, Cian, he's out for the game on Friday evening. That'll be good news for Galway. He's actually out for the next few weeks, unfortunately, for Treaty. Oh, that's a big out for Treaty, because he's a player that has really good skill and craft, and he can create chances. And that evening in Eamon DC Park, I thought he was very, very useful, and he caused Galway plenty of bother, particularly in the first half.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a massive loss. Obviously, it's probably coming at a good time for Treaty. I know that Galway might, look to freshen things up as well in July. They'll have the ability, I suppose, to do that financially, maybe. Anyway, Cian, you know more about that than I would. But obviously, Treaty maybe not so much. But, you've got under-19 squads now that'll become available to you as well. So fresh faces will be huge. There's one area that the lads picked up on as well, Cian, in the soccer podcast, is that, actually both sides, Treaty and Galway, have scored 17 goals each this year. But they did point out that maybe Galway, for instance, I watched the Cavan game, and Noel O'Connor said, what did he say perfectly? He said that Galway United murdered Cavan 1-0, in that they were so in control of the game, realistically. Cavan didn't create an awful lot. But do you think that maybe, you'd be hoping that maybe the likes of Mikey Place, Rory Keaton or Pádraig Cunningham could start belting up the goal charts a bit more, because that seems to be one area that you've struggled in terms of killing off teams in games?
Yeah, that's fair to say, and it's something that John Caulfield has repeatedly said throughout the season. I talk to him every week for the paper, and he has said that repeatedly, that Galway United need to be more clinical. So that's a fair enough assessment. And like last Friday's performance was probably Galway United's best of the season, especially in the first half, where there was real creativity and invention in Galway United's football in attacking areas. Wilson Maweru, he'd be a promising young player. He scored his third of the season after good work by Mikey Place. Keating has been effective in an attacking role. He can also play high up the pitch in a wide areas, as can Mikey Place. So they've seen service in those areas. And Pádraig Cunningham is a real threat off the bench. And the game against Athlone, he made a massive difference in the second half of that game. He was primed for that match, and he scored a couple of goals off the bench, and he's made an impact coming into games. So maybe perhaps Caulfield will want his attackers to have a better scoring ratio, but he has options, and he can make changes, which is a good thing, especially in recent weeks. Wilson Maweru has played through the middle, and Pádraig Cunningham has come on to good effect against Athlone in particular, but he was also useful against Cabinteely last week, which was, it's fair to say, Galway United's most impressive display of the season, I feel anyway, and they did dictate the game, and they were probably deserving of a greater margin of victory.
Yeah, I know that it's notable as well. Obviously, that one player who I was impressed with in pre-season for Galway, Francilio Lombardo, suffered obviously a massive injury. That was a blow, because he did look like a player who could really score a lot of goals at this level, because he had all the attributes really in terms of strength and pace as well. Cian, obviously, you know, the one point, obviously the first division is so good in terms of its excitement level this year. Anyone can beat anyone on the night. It's clear to see that. Even, you know, if you look at last week, obviously Shelburne went to Wexford. Everyone was probably expecting a 2 to 3 goal margin. It was a penalty victory, 1-0. But there's more examples than that I just can't think of at the top of my head. It's brilliant, the new format, isn't it? I know I've asked players and managers at Treaty this recently, and Tommy Barrett, Mark Ludden, they've all agreed that, you know, the excitement levels, obviously you've got a winner of the league, but then from second to fifth, you know, you have a chance of a playoff. It's like a mini marathon playoff where you have to win 3 games to get promoted, but it's half the league that's involved, which means that you have probably at least 8 teams going into the last 10 games that have a chance of getting into those playoff spots. It's super for excitement levels, really, and interest levels.
Completely. It's a brilliant league, and it was the same last year as well, where Galway United came from a long way off to get into the playoffs in 5th position. At one stage in the season, from a Galway United perspective, they trailed Cabinteely by 14 points, and they ended up finishing ahead of them. So it just shows that it proves that things can change quickly. Shelburne definitely seemed to be the most effective team. That's been proven week in, week out, and they're quite some way ahead, 8 points ahead of Treaty, 11 ahead of Galway United and others. But the only thing is that things can change quickly, and if any team can stitch a significant sequence of victories together, things can change rapidly, and that was proven last year too, where Galway United were quite a long way off, and they ended up getting into the top 5. But every game is competitive, and I know some of the managers would be saying it's a cliche that every game is tough at this level, but it actually is in this particular first division. And Ian Ryan has had an impact since coming in with Wexford, who have improved since he's taken over. So there's not one game in the league, could you say, that's a guaranteed 3 points at the moment. That's just the way it is, and that's brilliant, and it lends itself to like a real drama, Adrian, and that was the exact same last season. And the fact that the top team, of course, wins the league, and then from places 2 to 5 are involved in a playoff. It's really hard to get through that playoff scenario, which is another day's work. But I think, and I'd hope that the Treaty United and Galway United could be very much in the mix, and the evidence in recent weeks suggests that both teams will be fighting it out till the bitter end, hopefully. Yeah,
absolutely. This might be a preview for maybe a playoff game. You'd never know, Cian, as well. I obviously mentioned at the top of the show as well your involvement with LOI TV. Obviously, you've had Vinny Farty that I know on. Obviously, we know quite well here in Limerick for his goal scoring exploits. And would you believe it feels like Vinny was here longer than he was through that one season. It was a roller coaster ride. But obviously, there's been a change now. There's replays involved as well. It's really upped in quality, and it's a great service, to be honest, you know, to be able to watch matches back for the likes of ourselves when we're talking about, you know, trying to analyse other teams and the whole lot, and obviously beneficial for clubs. Have you been enjoying the role yourself in terms of your play-by-play commentary with LOI TV?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's something that last year I just kind of stumbled into. A man called Vincent O'Connor. He was involved with Galway United. He basically put a streaming service together for the games last year when people couldn't go to the games, and it just kind of came into the commentary by accident. But it's something that I really enjoyed, and it's nice to be involved on the match nights, and you get a bit of a buzz out of it. But it's so valuable for people that they can see the games, especially when they were behind closed doors and people couldn't attend matches. Because to me, like, sport is so important in my life and in my family's life. I was lucky enough that my dad brought me everywhere to watch League of Ireland matches, to watch all codes. But the League of Ireland was always a massive deal to us. And even from a Limerick point of view, my mom is from Nina, so on Sundays we used to go to Nina every weekend, and we regularly went to Rathban, to Hogan Park and Rathban at the time, to watch Limerick teams. I remember brilliant Limerick teams. Noel King was the manager, and I can remember a young Mike Hurley. He was a really promising player at the time. And your own uncle, I was telling you yesterday, your own uncle Albert, he was always a player that I wanted Galway United to sign, because he just had that character, and there was a bit of a messer in him, which was a good thing. And I used to just enjoy watching him play at Rathban, and when he came to play against Galway United at Eamon DC Park. There are massive links, of course, between Galway United and Limerick players down throughout the years. But from the LOI TV point of view, it's just so good that games are accessible to people, because, as I said, like, sport is so important in people's lives. Like, my little boy in normal times, he would come to watch Galway United everywhere in the country with me. He's only 8, but he'd come everywhere. Like, he's been to anywhere I go, I would bring him with me. So for the last year, he can't go to games. So every Friday I'm at the matches and he's watching the streams at home. So it's nearly like a connection with him, that he'd be talking, or he'd get a message sent to me at halftime, or then when I come home to talk to him about the match, he'd be all talk. So at least people are able to see games, and that's so important. And it's just nice now that maybe you have 100 spectators, and I'm sure Treaty could have 20 times that if crowds were allowed in big numbers. But to have the LOI TV, to have the games, as you mentioned, you were watching Galway United games, doing your research. I watched Treaty down in Cove last Saturday, and it's just brilliant that people can tune in, and it's so important. And the League of Ireland is a community, really. Like, a League of, like, you'd have such respect, Adrian, for League of Ireland followers. Of course, you want your own team to win, and that's natural. But just in Galway United followers know what it's like not to have a team in senior football. And in Limerick, that unfortunately was experienced too for the past while, until Treaty came back on board. So it's just so good. And there's nearly a respect exists there that senior football is back in Limerick, and Galway people and people throughout the country, but Galway people can empathise with the fact that people couldn't go to watch their team play, and you didn't have Galway United for a couple of years, and that was a hard time, even though Merview and Salthill Devon were in the League of Ireland at that time. But it wasn't the same, because you need a representative team for the area, and the fact that people can tune in on the streaming service is really, really important, and it's a really valuable thing, and hopefully it'll keep going into the future, because I know, even just from Galway United point of view, that there's like plenty of people in America that watch the games. Shane Doherty is from New Jersey. His family and friends watch the games every week. You've Galway United supporters dotted around the world that watch the games, and they're always talking about it. I'm sure it's the same in Treaty and in every other club, but it's such a vital thing, and it's a great service that you have, and you can go back and watch matches, and it's just brilliant to have matches, because we experienced life for maybe 3 or 4 months last year without matches, and it was tough when there was no matches.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you. And I also agree with you on the respect that everyone has in the League of Ireland. I have to say it's a great banter and camaraderie between all supporters, to be fair. It's a healthy rivalry, isn't it? And it's great to be our part of as well. But obviously a huge thanks to yourself, Cian, for taking the time out to join us this evening. And obviously you'll be geared up for the game Friday night as well. It promises to be a great occasion, as you said, and hopefully, from a selfish point of view, we can keep Galway United at arm's length, which we'd probably accept the draw in order to do that, to be honest with you, because anything is positive for us at the moment. But again, thanks for joining us, Cian, and obviously best of luck with the the rest of the season when the LOI TV service, and we'll be sure to catch up with you, I suppose, even in the final round of games, and who knows, maybe playoffs too.
Anytime, Adrian. Delighted to talk football, and keep up the good work.